The Wheellock is one of the most interesting ignition systems ever created. You needed a couple of things. Not only do you need firearms technology, you also had to know how to build a clock, all in the lock of a gun.
Until the end of the 17th century, the primary mechanism that you see in a long gun is a matchlock. And this mechanism was really problematic in a number of ways. First thing is it required a constantly burning match cord. And so you have what is essentially a lit flame or lit ember that you're keeping next to a bunch of gunpowder. And so explosions were something that happened quite frequently. The other problem is, of course, with a burning, smoldering ember, if there's any kind of dampness, if there's rain, you're not gonna be able to fire your gun. So they were looking for ways to try to move past these shortcomings with the matchlock. And the next step in the evolution of the firearm was the wheellock.
What you have is a wheel that is spun either a half or 3/4 of a turn by a very, very, very strong spring. You have a dog's head that is manually operated that you bring down on top of the wheel to fire it. Now, people are familiar with flintlocks, where the cock goes forward and strikes the steel and scrapes some bits of steel off of it and makes the sparks with a flint. Well, the wheellock couldn't do that. They couldn't use a flint because very, very soon you'd have the wheel ground down to nothing because there are little serrations on the wheel to make a spark. So what they used was iron pyrite, and it actually strikes fire on its own. This has one major advantage over the flintlock. The sparks are actually in the pan, right in the pan when you pull the trigger, whereas the sparks have to fall down into the pan when you use a flintlock. Consequently, a well-tuned wheellock is much, much faster than a flintlock. You hear a lot of people say that it was the wheellock, which was a very complex design. Well, because of the period it came out, it was probably invented by Leonardo da Vinci. However, it's highly unlikely that da Vinci did design the wheellock. He drew a picture of a design of wheellock that was using a coil spring, which was very interesting. But likely the wheellock appeared about 1500 in Germany.
If you ever look at the inside of a wheellock, there is so much going on because in order to try to weatherproof it as much as possible, there's a sliding cover on top of the priming pan to protect the powder. And so everything has to work in conjunction when you pull the trigger. The wheel has to start spinning, the sliding pan cover has to move, and the gun has to fire. And when you want to get all of those things working in concert, that takes some really extensive, time-consuming labor to produce something that can work that reliably with that many moving mechanisms and parts. And it all has to be timed correctly.
So the wheellock is an incredible piece of technology, but also an incredibly expensive piece of technology because you've got to have a guy that can build a clock and a gun. And I don't know how many guys there were, but probably not that many, and I think their time was valuable. And so as a mass issue military arm, the wheellock never caught on. Even the Ottoman Empire probably wasn't rich enough to give all of its guys wheellocks. And I'm not sure who would have kept them running anyway. They're a little finicky. You know, if you overwind the spring and cook it, that's a problem. If you underwind the spring, you might not get enough sparks. So there's a little bit of finesse in keeping a wheellock running. And I don't think the average soldier in the 1600s probably had the wherewithal or mechanical ability to constantly mess with what is really a precision instrument.
Wheellocks are not the most common guns. They're highly collectible. You see some of the more common military ones still bring upwards of $8,000 to $10,000 to $12,000. Some of the later sporting guns, not quite so much. And some of the high art guns, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They are amongst the least common firearms you will find. The interesting thing about wheellocks are they were responsible for some of the first firearms legislation because they could be carried concealed and ready to fire.